Here we're standing in Hanover Square, which in the 18th century was the retail center, the kind of elite retail center of Hamilton's New York. And this was where the shopping would be done, although shopping in the 18th century was a little bit different from shopping today or even in the 19th and 20th century, because most of the goods that were sold here, especially before the American Revolution, were not actually manufactured here. They were manufactured abroad, especially in England. That was part of the colonial relationship. And the ships would be loaded in England and sent over here, and they had inventories that they listed. So the merchants in this area some of them were wholesale only, but many of them were wholesale and retail. Some of them were retail only, and they would have grocery shops or dry goods shops where they would sell goods from England. And they would advertise in the newspapers. The newspapers actually were really mostly advertisements, and they would advertise in the newspapers and say, just in from the latest ship from London, and they would list very long inventories of all of the goods that came in from London at the time. And then people could come here to the shops and they could say, oh, I would like to see those gloves that you listed, or I would like some calicos, lots of different kinds of fabrics, many more than we would recognize. But at the time, the very savvy shoppers of the 18th century certainly recognized the different kinds of fabrics that were coming in and the different qualities. And as in many other areas, in the taverns, in the coffee houses, in the homes of New Yorkers, there was an increasing emphasis, especially among the elite and the upper classes, towards refinement and towards really seeing the difference and distinction in terms of the goods that they were buying. And that was really focused around this area. And it's not for nothing that it was so close to the water, because these ships would come in, they would unload them, and then they would bring the goods right here to Hanover Square and to other shops around the area. It's also worth pointing out, we are on the original water line of New York here. Pearl Street was the original water line. Pearl Street originally was called Queen Street, but after the American Revolution, they stripped most places in New York of their royal names. One exception was Hanover Square. Hanover was the name of the kings and the House of Hanover, and they actually kept that name here for some reason, but they changed a lot of the other names, including Queen Street becoming Pearl Street, King's College becoming Columbia University or Columbia College at the time. And another interesting thing about Pearl Street is that the reason that it was named Pearl Street was because one thing that was in great abundance on the docks and shores of New York was oysters. Oysters in the 18th century was actually considered food for the poor because they were so abundant. And one way that actually poor widows could support themselves was that they would scavenge for oysters and clams on the shore and then sell them, call out and sell them on the streets of New York. Or sell them outside of the markets. These huckster women who supported themselves and their children by selling goods on the streets of New York outside of the markets. So the oyster shells were ground down, and they actually were used to pave the street. And so Pearl Street had this, or Queen Street at the time, had this very pearly quality to it, and so they named it Pearl Street as a result of this pearly quality, as a result of these oyster shells being ground up to line and pave the streets. And so that's how Pearl Street got its name.